and the sunshine keeps people away, so we can't win in some respects. But for those of you that have come along this afternoon, thank you very much for taking the time to be here. I'd like to start by acknowledging country and acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we gather, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And Zali will speak further to that, but it is something very important to us as a team, that we recognise the past sorrow, but that we're working towards genuine healing and a relationship with our Indigenous people. So I pay my respects this afternoon. To those of you for whom this is your first town hall meeting with Zali, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy what you're about to experience. We've been holding these town halls over the last 3 years, albeit some of them did have to shift to being online. But for Zali and for us as a team, we really enjoy coming out, meeting with the community, letting you know what we've been doing, both down in Parliament in Canberra on behalf of the Warringah community, but also back here and bringing Parliament's work back to Warringah. We find that important as well. But most importantly, we love these days to hear from you and hear what issues and concerns you might have, what questions you have for Zali. So today, Zali's going to provide a bit of an update for you all, but we've left plenty of time at the end for questions. So if you do have questions as we go along, please keep them in mind and we'll make sure there's time for that at the end. And for those of you joining on Facebook, that includes you, please don't hold back from asking any questions that you'd like to via the chat function, and we'll come to you as well. So just before we get started properly, a real highlight of these community town halls, and as I said, we've been holding them for 3 years now, and it's been wonderful and so important for an MP to be able to engage with the community. They've all been really respectful of the issues, respectful of the diversity of opinion in the room, and respectful of each other as we speak. So if we can continue that tradition today, that would be terrific. So on that note, I'd like to hand over to the member for Warringah, Zali Steggall. Thank you.
Thank you, Bronwyn, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I know that after so much rain that we're finally having a beautiful day. It's a little tough being inside, but we have got so many really important issues, I think, and it's so important that I hear from you, from the community. And as Bronwyn said, we've had a number of meetings over the last 3 years, but it has been hard to have them in person. We've had a lot that have been over Zoom, so it's lovely to be able to do it in person. If I could also start by paying my respects to our Indigenous Elders, past, present, anyone in the room, but also the emerging leaders around Warringah and around the country, acknowledging that Australia is incredibly lucky to have had such custodianship and the longest living culture. 65,000 years is an incredible history, and there is so much to be learnt. That sharing has come at a cost. And it's important to acknowledge that sorrow and cost, but also the opportunity to work in so much better in the future together. It's been an amazing 3 years representing the Warringah community in Canberra, and I'm often asked whether life as a politician has been what I thought it would be. And I have to say the best of my expectations have been met and the worst of my expectations have been met. And the best is actually this side of it, the community engagement, getting that feedback on a regular basis, but also getting the outcomes for the community, which has been incredibly important. And I should say a lot of my team is here today, and I'm very thankful to them. It's a Sunday, and it's a beautiful Sunday, so for being here. Some that you can ask for some questions later. But the focus for 3 years has been on serving the Warringah community. And it has been an incredible time, because with COVID, we've had different challenges that we wouldn't normally probably have had, like the locked borders, like needing to engage with bringing citizens home. We had people stuck on all corners of the world on cruise ships and other places, needing exemptions for travel, urgent situations for families. And Julie, in fact, who's here, was in our office, was working around the clock often on assisting so many people in our community. And to give you a bit of a snapshot, we had over 30,000 emails over the last 3 years, and I've had many people in the community assisting me with that, because as you can imagine, I don't get to 30,000 emails. But it's incredibly important that we hear from the community on so many issues. That resulted in over 26,500 cases. So cases is where where there's some research or there's an engagement or there's a passing on that request or investigating something with NDIS or aged care or travel or exemptions. And so some 26,500 cases were opened, and it meant there was engagement with the community between the office and members of our community. I had over 1,500 Zoom meetings, which obviously in normal times there would have been more in person, but it was there was an opportunity to actually be even more available as a result of COVID lockdowns, and I think we all pivoted all the better for it to make sure we kept the work done. I've represented the community in a number of ways, in particular bringing the concerns of Warringah to government. And that's been by having meetings with ministers, but also corresponding to them to make sure we have in writing exactly what the call from the community has been. And so there's been over 170 letters to ministers, whether it's been assistance with visas or exemptions, but also around business support and other programs. We've had some 17 forums and we've had about 49 newsletters, and I know I've spoken a lot, but there's some 231 speeches in Parliament, so there you go. Very busy. Some of the highlights from a legislative point of view have been to bring forward sensible solutions, and in 2019 it was so important. Welcome. It was so important for me to bring sensible solutions to the table, especially when it comes to climate, and to bring leadership. We did that by introducing the climate change bills and then pushing for them to go to inquiry process. Now, they haven't yet passed, but they are still on the notice paper, and I will continue to push for their passing. It's sound legislation with overwhelming support in Australia from the Business Council of Australia, industry groups, conservation groups, unions. It really was a coming together from all sectors to put in place a framework that actually delivers good planning. But locally, from an environmental point of view, the biggest success for the community was finally getting rid of the oil and gas exploration from Newcastle to Manly, so PEP 11. And it was only possible to do that. And it was only possible to do that because of all your passion, right? As a representative of the community, I was able to put forward a private member's bill. It put pressure on the government. It became so toxic an issue that it had to be done away with before this election. But it's only because the community was behind it. The community was applying that pressure. And we saw state government get rid of the project much sooner than federal government. And I think that is an indictment in different priorities. Locally, we've also the Sydney Harbour Federation Trust, which of course has a lot of lands. We have up at North Head with the old barracks and everything, and then we have a lot more sites over on the Mossman side with 10 Terminal. We instituted Friends for Climate Action and had a number of very important forums, and I referred a number of programs and the legislations to the Auditor General to make sure they were properly funded. Which leads us into integrity. That was probably the lowest bar of my experience in representing you in Canberra, was what I found to be a real lack of integrity in Canberra. As a barrister, you have professional conduct rules. We have an obligation to the court. And most professions have that. And yet here we are, where we are, the one place where we're making the laws that govern all your lives, that put obligations on all of you in your professional lives, and there are no professional conduct rules for parliamentarians. I found that quite shocking, and I do think it's something that's missing, because I think it would raise the bar of the standards and accountability. Obviously also the lack of a Federal Integrity Commission is a very big issue. I seconded the bill from Helen Haynes. We worked together. There's been a lot of collaboration and consultation with groups to make sure it's a robust model. This is not something that is going to be an unfair or, the government has been very scathing and very critical, but it is doing everything it can to avoid scrutiny, essentially. The model that's proposed is the best of all the models from around Australia and all our different state models, and has the necessary safeguards, but also the necessary level of scrutiny. The last 2 years, and in particular last year, was an interesting year for culture and the toxic culture of Canberra, and that's where that lack of professional standards and integrity really, really shone through. Obviously, the revelations of the workplace of Canberra, the bullying, the sexual harassment, even sexual assault allegations were quite shocking, and the lack of engagement on legislative reform when it came to implementing respect at work and implementing that MPs and judges be liable and protected for sexual harassment. There were things that really shocked me quite a bit, and I really appreciated being there at the right time to put the pressure on the government to enact and start with some of those recommendations. I presented an amendment to the Sex Discrimination Act, asked questions in question time, and with the pressure from the community and expectations, ultimately the government did amend the Sex Discrimination Act, but still hasn't implemented all the recommendations of the Respect at Work report. From the economy and point of view, the bulk has been engaging with our local businesses, our chambers of commerce from the Manly, Warringah and Mossman in terms of what kind of assistance was needed. We have a high proportion of small businesses in Warringah, and the last 2 years have been incredibly difficult. Lockdowns and periods where we've really lost so much business. Areas like Manly that rely on retail and tourism, 60% of yearly turnover is done during the 3 weeks of December, January. And over the last 3 years, we've had bushfires and smoke blanketed our community. We've had 2 Christmases in a row with essentially COVID lockdowns. So it's been incredibly tough for our business community. And that's where I've been so proud of our community in that we've really supported local businesses. There's been so many initiatives, and so we've had a number of forums and working with our state members of MPs as well to make sure federal government and state government understood where the measures worked, where they didn't, where they needed to be tweaked. Some of it worked well, some of it not so well. Now, one area that people often ask is, how does an independent deliver for the community? Ironically, it's by being outside of government that you deliver all the more, because you're so much more proactive. It was really important for me to be here to serve the community. So one of the first things I did was to put in place a grants officer to make sure we could assist the community and non-for-profit organisations in applying for grants and make it a really proactive system. And Rachel, my grants officer, is here in the back of the room for anyone who would like to talk. But grants is a major part to make sure Warringah is really at the forefront of getting funding. And it's very hard to compare from one term to the next, but we have significantly increased the funding to Warringah, and that's without any major rorting kind of announcements, to some $131 million in grants to the community. And that's because we're being proactive, community focused. And some of those grants, it's exciting, and there was, in fact, just as you walk through, you might have seen the Manly Vale Community Garden that's just received a $10,000 grant from the Stronger Communities program for potting sheds and composting. This area of Warringah has received some 208 grants, which is about 2/3 of the whole electorate, because remember, Warringah goes to Neutral Bay, and it's a total of some $92 million. And it's been really important for me to implement a grants committee to ensure we had a really broad and arm's length process of assessing grants applications and allocating them. And they've gone to a vast number of recipients in our community, from South Curl Surf Life Saving Club, Queenscliff Surf Life Saving Club, North Stain, Lifeline Northern Beaches, Vinnie's, the Childhood Dementia Initiative, Raiders Rugby, Friends of Freshwater, Friends of Ivanhoe Park, Bargalla Bowling Club, Seaforth Bowling Club, Manly Warringah Pipe Band, Manly Boomers AFL, Scouts, a number of Scouts, and I've met a number of wonderful Queen Scout award recipients, Northern Beaches Women's Shelter, Forestville RSL, Community Care Northern Beaches, Men's Kitchen Association, Northern Beaches Volleyball Association, Manly Warringah Football Association, and Warringah Bowling Club. So it's been really important for me to make sure that we are democratising the process, to make sure all organisations are having access to that assistance. one of the highlights for me in being the MP for Warringah has been being in the role at a time where you have an opportunity to really make a difference. And that call in particular came at the fall of Kabul with, in terms of refugees. It's not often you have an opportunity to really change someone's life in a very real way. And my team was just amazing, and in particular Luke from the office, in working around the clock to assist some women and their families that were seeking refuge, seeking to escape from Kabul. And by working with the minister and the staff in the minister's office, we were able to get over 100 Afghan families and athletes and their families out. And I've had the opportunity to meet some of them. And I can assure you this is a reflection on the people of Warringah, that we were in a position to really assist them. And they are so incredibly grateful for that opportunity they have of a new, safer life. In terms of our challenges, unfortunately, refugee policy is still not, there's still a long way to go, but pressure from communities has seen the resettlement of a number of refugees that had been for a long time in detention centres around Australia, some 9 years, some of them. But we still have the Billawheeler family, for example, that was taken from their home shortly after the last election and are still in community detention. And we do keep track through the emails at the office of all the issues that the community are concerned about. And if I could say the order of priorities of the issues were obviously coronavirus and the vaccine, but refugees, Afghanistan, Billawheeler family were all very prominent. Aged care, the Royal Commission, a high level of participation and concern about implementation of the recommendations. Federal integrity and a federal ICAC, climate change grants, and the Environmental Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act review, which in fact the Samuels review, the recommendations have still not been implemented. In terms of probably closer to home or local issues that I've been very engaged with and engaging with the government about, we've had transport, infrastructure, reports still come out. Infrastructure is a major problem. We still have some of the most congested roads in Australia. Of course, lockdown kind of took that off the forefront because we didn't have the same kind of level of commute, but it's very much resuming, and we need to make sure that focus on infrastructure remains. So the Beaches Link tunnel has been slightly paused by the New South Wales State Government as a result of the disaster, sort of the repair and the work needing to be done around our flood-affected communities. But it's important that we maintain that pressure and the commitment to keep improving our infrastructure. There was the inquiry and the environmental impact statement, and I wrote on behalf of many that had written to me in relation to concerns about the costs, the business model and the environmental impacts, and needing to maintain that infrastructure nonetheless needs to continue to be progressed. In relation to some of the other local issues, so there's a National Harbour Federation Trust, and then housing affordability and homelessness is an issue that we do get quite a bit of correspondence about. It is a difficult problem, and in particular for older women. Women over 55 are the fastest growing group experiencing homelessness. And it's a complex issue, but it does require a number of policy levers to be activated. And it is something that I've been pushing on the government, that they needs to be better focus on it. Unfortunately, at budget time, it still has not really, it didn't receive the focus necessary. But it does also link, and I'd encourage you, I've put printouts of the policies that I'll go through in a minute, proposing for this next Parliament. But there are some policy levers we can start to apply, and the government needs to engage with this. It is a complex area. We need to look at Commonwealth rent assistance, which we know has an impact. We know during COVID, Job Seeker, JobKeeper, all those assistance payments made a big difference, and a high proportion of it returns to the economy because it is ultimately all spent. So I think there needs to be a much better focus on that. And we do need to see better cooperation between Commonwealth and state governments to look at how do we transition, for example, away from a stamp duty system, which is some of the policy proposals state government has started to talk about, but we need that better cooperation. In terms of aged care, the Royal Commission was incredibly distressing. Some of the facts that came out were really, really worrying. Unfortunately, there's a complex and a high number of recommendations coming out of it. And I supported the call from Rebecca Sharkey, the member for Mayo, that actually a commission be implemented to ensure supervision of implementation of all those recommendations, because it will be too easy for some to not get implemented, and there's already delay. We know there was a number of some 40,000 aged care funding for plans to implement it at the last budget, but we do have a big arrears, and it's an issue that a lot in our community have written to me about. In particular, we hosted a forum on understanding aged care and how to commence, and that was incredibly well received, and I look forward to get feedback of what more is needed. There were issues of age discrimination within aged care, the difference, the fall off between NDIS cutting off at 65 and aged care plans, a vast difference. And 65, I would say with respect, is a very young age for how the legislation currently works. And the difference in support is considerable. If someone is unfortunate and needing assistance between an event occurring before 65 compared to an event occurring after 65. It's a difference of some $300,000 worth of support under NDIS to about $50,000 under aged care plan. So it's vastly different for maybe a couple of months age difference. In terms of the NDIS, and it's been in the news recently, the concern about the costs moving forward. It's an incredible program that has assisted so many in our community, and we hosted an NDIS forum to assist participants, especially when the government was looking at implementing independent assessments, which many community members felt strongly against, and it was really good to have that opportunity to give the feedback on it. Environmentally, the major issue in this last parliament was the Environmental Protection Biodiversity Conservation Amendment Bill, which was to give effect to the Samuels Review. It didn't get through the Senate because the government tried to use its numbers through the House to push it through. Highly, I would say, controversial because it failed to address the number one recommendation of the Samuels Review, being that if we are going to limit approval process down to a one-stop, one approval level, that we needed national environmental standards, and the government resisted implementing that. So that is a major issue. Locally, we've had concerns around Curl Lagoon, around telecommunication, and there are concerns around Manly Dam, which obviously here are it's such an incredible environment for us locally. In terms of, I'm trying to think through. There's so many issues that everyone writes about, so it's always incredibly rewarding to get the feedback from everyone. We know in this election, cost of living is having a huge impact, and at the last budget, unfortunately, I was a little cynical about some of the announcements because I think they were very short-term sweeteners that didn't really address any of the structural issues that are really in the system. We saw, for example, the fuel excise rebate, which is going to cost some $3 billion to the bottom line. But in 6 months' time, there's no guarantee of where we go, and there was nothing built into the system that guaranteed everyone had access to that rebate. So it was going to be slightly, just not discretionary, but going from different petrol station to petrol station, it would not be a constant or consistent application. In contrast, there was simply nothing in the budget to really accelerate a transition to cleaner transport. And recently I just had the exciting opportunity to launch our electric vehicle transport policy and our electric campaign bus that's been doing the tour. There's so much opportunity for Australia to deliver, to have better policy and to engage with this sector. Transport is some 20% of our emissions nationally, and it's the fastest growing sector at a time where you don't have COVID lockdowns. It's the fastest growing sector of emissions. We don't have a local car manufacturing industry. We have some electric vehicles starting to be manufactured, but on the whole, 90% of our fuels are imported, and we spend a lot of money on our 2 remaining fuel refineries. It's a no-brainer that we need to transition, and the government needs to engage with programs to match, for example, state grants programs to make them affordable to all. We need to make sure things like the luxury car tax, fringe benefit tax are all adjusted to facilitate a much easier uptake of electric vehicles. And that's where I think it is a very frustrating environment federally that the government is still just absolutely dragging its feet on this issue. In terms of this coming election, I think there is an amazing opportunity, but we have to be really clear. This is a really important decade. This year, only about a month ago, many of our areas were flooded absolutely. I think they were described in the media as rain bombs. The intensity was just huge. Just down the road here, we had a local school pretty much underwater. We had cars floating down the road. Now, I know we have from time to time had flooding and the Manly Dam has spilt over. But what we're seeing and what the science is saying and all the experts are saying is this is happening more and more frequently to a greater and greater extent. And we need to get ready for this to continue, and it will get worse. In the last 3 years, we've gone from droughts to record bushfires to record droughts. In the last budget alone, it was $10.3 billion over the last 3 years in costs. And that's without putting a cost to the communities where we're talking people are displaced, they are homeless, their businesses are shut, they don't just reopen the doors. So that $10.3 billion is just the get back on your feet kind of cost. And I was I was angry actually that in the last budget there was only some $210 million towards our resilience building agency. I mean, it's nonsensical to think that we're going to lose billions of dollars in reactive programs to impacts, and we are not investing in resilience and adaptation. We desperately need to do this. Only a few weeks ago, the last IPCC report came out warning us that unless emissions are halved by 2030, local governments, state governments and federal governments will simply not cope with the frequency and scale of events that will continue to happen. And what you then see is a real breakdown of systems and communities left at risk. During the course of the climate change bill, I put to the department of doing a national climate risk assessment to ensure communities have a warning system. Have we identified the communities that are at risk? And they haven't. They're still resisting having a climate risk assessment nationally, because if you acknowledge the risk, you then really have a duty to adapt and put in a plan to address that risk. And so it's this constant denial and delay that I'm horrified at how much that is putting our communities at risk. And finally, I know some questions came in from a national security's point of view, and this is all interlinked. It was incredibly interesting to meet with retired Defence Chief Chris Barry, who our Defence Forces have very much looked at the question of national security and how we are going to be impacted in our region by instability caused by population displacement, by food insecurity, all that will be exacerbated by global warming. And he was quite frustrated at the lack of engagement on this issue from a security point of view. And I absolutely agree on that. I think we are, the last 3 years have reminded us that it's so important. Our international relations are incredibly important, as are our national relations. I've found it quite interesting that it's felt like being in several countries in Australia over the last few years, with state governments really going off, everyone having a different take on medical advice and different positions. And it's been quite challenging to think that we don't have a right as Australian citizens to leave our country or come back to our country. I think I've had a number of people be quite challenged by that situation. But I think it does come back to leadership and how we value that collaborative and working with one another. And there's been a breakdown of that I think is the worst part of what I've observed in the last 3 years at a federal level. I have been dismayed by the lack of leadership in important situations. The breakdown of our international relationships with countries like France and the EU, they're really concerning, because in a geopolitical climate that is fluctuating, right? There is instability. The strength of your relationships is incredibly important. And if I could, and I know I had some questions come in around Solomon Islands, for example, and those announcements, which are incredibly concerning. It is a real worry that for so long, our Pacific family in particular have been pleading with the Australian government for greater policy on climate, for greater respect for the challenges that they face. And it's unfortunately often been met with derision and sort of dismissal. And now we see ourselves where our relationships are not as good as they should be. We haven't invested in those relationships. So I am incredibly concerned about that. And I have sought more briefings from the Minister and from the departments around how we're sitting, what's the plan, where we're going. I think it's important that we speak with one voice internationally, but it has to be a voice that is respected and that is mutually respectful of our neighbouring nations and our trading partners. So I think that is going to be an interesting challenge of the future and of this next Parliament, as we see the impact of the war in Ukraine, for example, also impacting us in a very real way. Cost of living is a major issue. But fuel, food, insurance, all of these are directly impacted by global warming impacts. So it's complete fallacy when people try and think that global warming is not an issue that we need to address because we might have a different priority on economic issues. And finally, on integrity, the calculation is some $55 billion over the last 3 to 4 years has been, I would say, misdirected or misspent, has been spent for political expediency rather than merit for communities. And I can assure you it is a community and it is taxpayers that are paying for that, because that is public funds not being used where it's needed. And I strongly support that we implement policies whereby only a smaller percentage of grants programs may be at the discretion of a minister, when there is a panel and a commission and an independent body implemented to ensure strong recommendations of where they should go. I think integrity and fiscal discipline is incredibly important at this time. We are at a level of record debt. It's been necessary for a lot of that spending to keep a lot of our businesses going, but it is incredibly important that we get back to some discipline and accountability about how that's going. But locally, really exciting. It's hard to believe that we've got 3 weeks to go to another election. I'm incredibly thankful for the community, for the support I've received. So many of Team Vale that are in our community. I know this movement of independence is challenging many traditional media political media, and the political parties, but it stems absolutely from the community that is tired of the status quo and wants to see politics done differently. So my pledge to Warringah is to continue to do that. It's been an incredible privilege for the last 3 years to represent Warringah. We are an incredibly kind, caring community focused on good national outcomes, not just outcomes for Warringah, and I think that's something really, really fantastic to be commended on. So thank you so much, and I look forward. I'm assuming there will be a few questions, so thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks, Vale, that was great. So we will move into our question segment now. And just a reminder for those of you that are not here with us physically but joining us on Facebook, feel free to pop some questions into the chat as well. But Hadley up the back there has a microphone that she's going to bring to you. So if you do have a question, please just raise your hand, keeping in mind what we were talking about earlier about respecting other speakers, respecting diversity of opinion. And just when you do speak, if you could just say your name and perhaps the suburb that you're from, just to help us put it in context as well. So first question.
Hi. Thank you, Zali. Thanks, Bronwyn. My name's Helen. I live in Manly Vale. And I just wanted to ask a question about the level of the dole. Given that, if we want to jumpstart the economy, that's a perfect way to do it. Every dollar that's contributed goes straight back into the economy, but the government is totally resisting it.
Yeah, I mean, like it was considered to be New Start. Previous election, it was called New Start. It's now Job Seeker. And we saw during COVID where there was a COVID supplement that was implemented onto the old New Start levels, that it really made a difference. So those needing support, looking for employment, it lifted them above the poverty line and allowed them to, in fact, participate better, look for employment, and actually all-round benefits. I consulted widely with ACORS, with the Business Council of Australia, and the recommendations to government was to raise it between $55 and $65 a day. And I met with the minister and strongly supported those recommendations. Unfortunately, the government was still stuck to only increasing it by about $2.50. And look, and I must say I had a really frustrating meeting with the minister on that issue. I would say some fairly young advisors sitting around the table telling me that but there's all these other programs and all these other ways that everyone's really fine, and I think a real disconnect between the lived experience and the theory of what they think they're proposing. So I strongly support that it be lifted, especially where we know it's a direct return to GDP. It's a direct return to the economy because it gets spent. Essentially, it is in dire need. What we've seen over the last 3 years, non-for-profits in our community like One Mill, the demand has absolutely exploded for assistance when it comes to meals and other aspects, and then the mental health impact of financial stress is quite considerable as well. So I agree. I don't disagree. I absolutely agree. There is a business case, there is a social case for it. There's a caring case for it. It's the right thing to do, but there's also a business case for it because it does return to the economy. It is still Look, I have butted heads with the government on this because the focus has been on supporting specific industries sometimes, like tradies, and I'm all for tradies, but not at the expense always of other industries and other caring sectors. This one, unfortunately, it's come off maybe the front, the attention of the national media. The campaign around New Start was stronger. There hasn't been as much discussion of this as far as the current campaign between the leaders of the major parties. But like I say, I've talked about it a lot with ACORS, with Business Council of Australia, and all agree that it needs to be raised.
Thank you, Helen. Yes?
Zali, firstly, thank you so much for all your work that you've done over the last few years, and particularly in terms of environment. My name's Bridget, and I live in the Manly Vale as well. You talked about the Samuel review and this uniformity of standards between federal and state, but I also think at a local level, at an LGA level as well, there's obviously a lot of issues at the local government level. We've got the sea walls at Coleroy, and we've got proposals to replace turf fields with synthetic, and I do know the locals are concerned about a number of environment issues, and we've got Manly Dam, and we've got the environment around there, and local government proposing certain things, which I think there should be uniformity of those standards, not just at the national, federal, not just at the state, but at an LGA level as well. So I was interested in your thoughts on that, so that I think it is an issue for all of us. It's at the grassroots, how we can have an impact individually, we can have an impact at the state level, we can have an impact at the federal level. But I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
No, look, all the surveys over the last 3 years, climate and environment have been the number one issue of our community, overwhelmingly. Whether it's been water or our parks or Manly Dam, we care about the environment. I think we've certainly learned to appreciate it over the last 2 years, all our mental health, and I don't think any of us could have done so well if we didn't have such an amazing environment to get out to. Local government obviously is generally it's state legislation that dictates a lot of how projects and developments ultimately approved. And the difficulty with the EPBC Act amendment was because at the moment there are approvals that have to be obtained at state level and then also at federal level, and it's the proposal to get rid of the two-step process to be only one. Now the concern there is some states have some protections, and then if you go and especially with the from a native title point of view, like Western Australia has very different standards in terms of approving certain things. So the lack of uniformity is concerning, especially around cultural heritage and environmental protection. It's really important for the community to be involved. It's one of our focuses has been ensuring you all know when you can make submissions and participate in inquiries, because my overwhelming observation is from government is unless the community speaks up, they will proceed on with the most efficient or easy way through and not always take as much notice of the environmental impacts as necessary. It does generally fall upon the community to raise the concerns about environmental impact. And I think we saw that overwhelmingly with the Beaches Link Tunnel as a project, which has some serious environmental concerns. And through that EIS process, a lot of people wrote in about it. And it is a hard balance, right? It's very hard. None of us we're not returning back a couple hundred years. We have modern lives. Infrastructure and development occurs, but it has to be done mindfully and with the environment, and it has to be balanced. And that's where engagement of the community is incredibly important. And for example, on the Climate Change Bill inquiry, we had over 6,500 submissions from so many members of the community getting involved. The Samuels Review, huge number of submissions from the community. It is how government takes notice. It is and like the PEP 11 is the classic example. It's with community pushback that you can change the outcomes. So I'm very passionate about advocating into government, bringing the issues forward. Brought forward a number of petitions around a number of issues. Local, I don't impact local government's operation, but I can certainly raise local communities' concerns, and I've sought to do that and meet with the community. But I look forward to any suggestions of how we can do it bigger or better, because it is important for that. And I should note, we've got representatives of the council here in their private capacity, but it is important for all levels of government to be mindful of community concerns. So. Yes.
I might just add as well, local environment is one of Zali's 6 key policy pillars. So there is a copy up the back of her local environment policy, and it can be accessed online as well. So you might like to have a look. But yes, Deputy Mayor Candy Bingham has very kindly offered afterwards, if there are particular council issues and local government issues that anyone would like to discuss, she'll have a town hall outside afterwards. So thank you.
I didn't know if I should dob you in a professional capacity.
Okay, we might go to the next question in the back there. Yep.
I was going to ask about this electric bus of yours. How are you charging it? Is it using lithium batteries? Because I think with the current technology, it's actually a double whammy. You're creating more of an environmental impact by using an electric-powered vehicle at the moment. And until we go to a more organic battery system or a hydrogen-generated fuel cell system, that you're actually creating more of an environmental impact with your bus the way it is.
I don't know how I'm creating more of an environmental impact.
How are you charging it?
Well, I'm 100% renewable. It's being charged at a local company, Colour Maker, who have 100% renewable solar panels on their roofs and batteries. And they are...
Is it lithium batteries?
It is, but from a global warming point of view, this is a much better outcome. With electric
How many hectares of rainforest were destroyed to make those lithium batteries?
Well, with respect... If you only need to look at footage of where thermal coal and coal mining is going, I'm not saying any outcome is perfect, but we're not going back to the horse and cart era. And I can assure you that electric transport is going to mean that we have clean and quiet cities. It is a huge difference. And I'd encourage you to actually, well, I don't know if we're allowed to yet, but go on the bus. And it is great that actually state government is focused on electrifying our public transport. It is the way to go. We need to get into electrification of transport. EVs can save an average family about $1,000 a year. So while the government, when we're talking about cost of living, it is the easiest way we can assist families with that. For example, in the last budget, there was some $15 billion towards projects, essentially sweeteners to the National Party. But in particular, there was some $6.7 billion for 3 dams that have no business case and no actual plan properly put forward. And we calculated that that $6.7 billion could actually be a 50% rebate towards solar panel and battery installations for some 860,000 households. And they could be saving over $1,000 a year on their power prices. So there are so many smarter ways that we can do it. So unfortunately the bus, for example, it's Electromotive that we're renting the bus from. Yutong is the bus manufacturer, and unfortunately it's not Australian manufactured. There are some manufacturers in Australia, but this one isn't. But this is where we should be. If we are talking about increasing jobs, having an Australian manufacturer. It absolutely can be done, and I will continue advocating for us to do that, because at the end of the day, 90% of our fuel is imported. We have some of the worst fuel standards in OECD countries. And the government is not committed to improving fuel standards or car emission standards. So as a result, we are going to become the dumping ground for the worst cars in the world, as most major car manufacturers are moving to electric vehicles by 2030 and 2035. We are simply going to be left behind. So at the moment, we have about 2% of new car sales are electric, and they are expensive, absolutely. We need, my policy, and again, the part of my steps and climate leadership is that we should be aiming for about 75% or 76%. So 3 out of 4 new car sales by 2030 should be electric. And it's absolutely doable. And that then generates a second-hand car market that will then assist as well. There could be, for example, grants programs, or for example, a trade-in process. You know, when you're getting your green slip and you're trading in incredibly old cars that are dirty, that there should be a way of actually facilitating a transition to electric vehicles. But for the moment, Australia is not sending any signals to the international community to send clean cars here.
My think it's the right choice, because I think with the current battery technology that we shouldn't commit to electric vehicles. I think that there's organic batteries that are being developed that are going to be better. And whilst they're all based, I think it's a problem if you mandate people to change their cars.
Well, no one's mandating anyone to change anything. Let's be really clear. We're talking about when people are at that junction in their life where they are looking at transitioning to a new vehicle or replacing an old inefficient car, rather than continuing with dirty, polluting cars, to shift to electric vehicles is where the rest of the world is going. And we don't have an Australian car manufacturing industry. These are the cars that we will need to be importing. And the sooner we send the right signal to the rest of the world, the sooner we will actually have the choice that we should have. I met with the UK ambassador to discuss the climate change bill, or climate change act that was passed in the UK in 2008. And one of the industries that the UK have indicated that has most benefited from having that legislative certainty has been their car manufacturing. As a result of their net zero by 2050 commitment and the fact that it was legislated, they have been able to have the Nissan Leaf be manufactured in the UK. It has ensured whole communities have vibrant manufacturing, the jobs, and they have a huge amount of transition. They are on track for some 68% emissions reduction by 2030. Now that compared to Australia, our official targets are still only 26 to 28% emission reduction by 2030. Because of the hard work the state governments have done and the private sector have done, we are possibly going to get to about 35, but the major parties are absolutely failing to pull the kind of levers necessary to accelerate that transition. So there may be other technologies to come, but for the moment, the technology around electric vehicles is sound. It is so much more efficient. It will alleviate cost of living for so many households, and it's something that it's a low-hanging fruit and a no-brainer from a policy point of view.
Just on the electric bus, we will let you all know via social media when there are opportunities to hop on that bus. We're obviously not offering the new hop, skip and jump service or anything like that. We're not in competition with council, but we just think it's a great opportunity to really get a glimpse of what the future could be and what our communities could see on the street. So we'll keep you updated. Next question up the back there, and then we'll come forward to the front.
Hi Zali, my name's Louise. I live in Seaforth. I'm really interested in, and you mentioned it earlier about social and affordable housing. It's something close to my heart. I've worked for Land and Housing more recently, and I know there's a 12-year wait list for people on affordable housing, which is just not good enough. Affordable housing is a different aspect rather than social housing, so I don't want to mix the two because they're two different things. So I'm just interested to know what the federal government is doing in this space.
Well, at the moment, very little. There's a lot of talk and a lot of reviews around housing affordability, and as you say, there's a number of issues. You know, we go from social housing to housing affordability to, for example, support when it comes to people, housing support, and then affordability. Obviously, the beaches are an incredible place, and we've seen over the last few years prices rise incredibly, and we now know inflation is a major concern, and so we have got a problem from a housing bubble as well, and some levers are probably should have been pulled sooner to really halt inflation. In terms of affordable housing and social housing, that is a major problem because we've been falling further and further behind for some time. We haven't been constructing enough. It needs to be, I believe, in conjunction with state and local government that, for example, developments need to have a percentage component of social housing, but also affordable housing, especially for frontline workers. We can't find ourselves as a community where school teachers, police, nurses can't afford to live in our communities. It really is. So the question is twofold, though. It's also rising the wages within some of those professions to then living and affordability as well. So there's no simple solution. I wish there was a magic wand for all of this, but there isn't. But it has to be put on the agenda, and there has to be a proactive approach by government. At the moment, there is a recognising it's a problem, but not much really. There's a little bit in terms of first homeowners grants, for example, for assisting younger people in getting into the housing market. There is some announcement when it comes to social housing being built, but it's really so far behind the arrears that I'm sceptical. We need a really proactive way to catch up.
And can I just add to that? I think some of the councils are doing a really good job in that regard. So City of Sydney, for example, they're foregoing some parcels of land in the inner city that were old bus depots or whatever, and they're basically handing over that land for, instead of $12 million on the market, $12 million or 1 point, whatever, they're giving it to community housing providers to then build social and affordable housing. So I think sometimes we might not even need to look at the federal government to do that. I think in partnership with local councils as well in Warringah, we might be able to find parcels of land that no longer used for their current use or previous use to then partner with community housing providers to provide that opportunity.
And we're seeing that happen on a case by case. I would say that my concern is we're not seeing it in a systemic way. It tends to be localised and sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, and that then creates arrears in other areas. So this can't be, I know other members of parliament have said, let's just build a lot more out west, that it's a problem that we build somewhere else. And at the same time, we have a problem here that there's a very there's strong resistance from the community about densification, that we don't want to see more high rise and we don't want to see more denser construction. So it's finding the right balance, but it is about being proactive on the issue. Council, I think Northern Beaches Council is fairly, I know it's been discussed, I've discussed it with them, it's been discussed with state MPs as well. It is something that is very much on the agenda. There's no quick fix, but it is on the agenda to be addressed. Yes.
Hi, Sally. My name's Jane. I'm from Allambie. Thank you so much for everything you've spoken about. I just had a question about the NDIS. It's not a system that I've really had very much to do with. My husband works in the not-for-profit sector, but there was some reporting last week about what appears to be a system in a fairly abysmal state with some funding decisions that leave people further behind. There's a mass exodus of the legal department, which seems to be increasing the strain on the AAT as those funding decisions go through. Question, I suppose, what do you hear from the community in relation to NDIS, and what do you think the government response should be? How big is this issue, and is the system broken?
Yeah, the feedback I've received from the community is it's very case-by-case the experience people have with the NDIS system. So whilst I've had some constituents have an incredibly positive experience, and I've met with a number of service providers as well, I've then also through the office we've had people who have needed assistance because their plans have been reviewed and without any explanation have been cut, for example, or the administrative burden on families in complying, in providing assessments, in providing the various doctors' reports. And it does appear to have an overly onerous administrative burden on continually updating information and having to, the medical reports for someone, for a person with a condition that is a long-term condition, to have to renew the same report every 12 months seems to be just an incredible waste of time and an administrative burden. So I do think that an audit process to get rid of those overlap will help the scheme overall. It does have a number of inefficiencies. The government went down the route of trying to do the individual individual sort of independent assessments, but that was strongly opposed because of the nature for a number of participants of the concern that a stranger would be coming in and assessing, not the doctors or the service providers that understand their case. I think what's really important, this is a huge scheme, but I think it's a cornerstone of what we provide as Australian society. It's been an incredible success story in terms of better lives for some 450,000 Australians with disabilities, but also their families and everyone that is impacted. There's about 270,000 workers in the sector, and we know, again, this is an area we need more training and we need to be focusing on that. Therapists, educators, workers, personal carers, and that creates a lot of economic return in industry as well. Per capita, and I do have the number, per capita, the analysis of the scheme shows that for every dollar spent, the economy actually benefits by a factor of 2.25, right? So it's really important, if there's scaremongering in the media of thinking, this is this ballooning cost that can't be sustained, that the investment into the scheme actually returns back to the economy. And for NDIS, it's estimated to have contributed some 52.4 billion to the national economy in 2020-2021. So it's really important to remember this is not a nice to have, can we or can't we afford it. This is part of our fabric of our society, and it has a very strong return. So I think, but what we do need to be mindful of is it has to work well. And I think we need to make sure we listen to users to make sure their experience works well. And overwhelmingly, the feedback I had, and especially during the NDIS forum, was in how many instances families where participants had long-term illnesses or disabilities that weren't changing from year to year, and yet having to renew assessments and or fast deteriorating conditions that required prompt analysis and adapting of their plans, and then the overly administrative process means that plans are not keeping track with need, and then families are really left. And this is where I have got Julie and Sean here, who are my electoral officers who deal with the NDIS cases, and we do have the ability to contact the department to get assistance in having plan reviews and querying where outcomes appear to be at odds with needs. But it shouldn't have to get down to that. It shouldn't have to get down to your local MP through the office having a one-for-one assessment. The system should work better. So again, I do think there's efficiencies that should be able to be done. It's a bit like the robo-debt scheme. You have to have caring and good service. Customer service has to be at the core of how the government builds the model and funds the model, and then I think we'll all benefit from it. So I'll continue to focus on that.
Thank you.
Probably got time for about 2 or 3 more questions, and just a reminder for those of you online, if you've got one, to type in the chat there.
Hi Zali, my name's Taylor. I'm from Manly Vale. I'm a young person. I'm in my 20s, and I know a lot of young people like myself are looking towards the future and generally feeling a bit hopeless about it. We have, when we look to Parliament, we just see a lot of harassment and poor standards. When we look to wages, we see them stagnating. We see inflation increasing and housing becoming increasingly out of our range. And when we look to climate change policy, we have a government that took young people to court to tell them they don't have a duty of care to protect us. And a lot of young people are really frustrated. And I'm just wondering what your views are on helping young people feel like they matter and on feeling like they can actually voice their opinions going forward.
Thank you. Well, look, young people are one of the main motivators that got me into politics, and I don't think of myself as a politician. But I do feel an incredible sense of responsibility to your generation, that we've had all the facts, we've had the information, and we're not, we are on track to leave the biggest intergenerational debt there can be from an environmental sense. Incredibly important for young people to engage. So young women, I have been presented with the survey that 18 to 25, 0% were interested in politics. And so to me that was incredibly shocking. It's really important for young women and young men to be involved. If it was said to me, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So decisions are going to be made about your future, right? Decisions will be made about your future if you don't engage. You have to be involved. So obviously being registered to vote and participating in vote in forums. It really matters to me to hear the voice of young people. I think government just doesn't get it at this point. The Minister for Youth is the same Minister for Ageing and Sport. Minister Colbeck. So look, I don't know how often he met with young people, to be totally fair. But incredibly important. So for 3 years ago, straight after the election, I met with a group of 18 to 25 from UNICEF, and they said young people overwhelmingly didn't feel heard. So I implemented the Youth Ambassadors program, where I meet every 4 to 6 weeks with the school captains of all the schools in our area. Now, it's much harder to catch uni or older kids, so you can catch them at school before they've left as the school captains, and that means I'm meeting with a group of about 26 to 30 young adults, and they then go back to their peer groups and they share with me their concerns, what their year groups are facing from mental health. Last year, consent education, sexual identity were big. Communication with older generations. They were through COVID, young people were really aware about those challenges. Environment, all of those things were very big again on their concerns. So it's important, I think, and a lot of people have asked me, is that program in other electorates? I'm not sure, I don't think so. And I'm happy to share the model with as many as would like to do it. But that Youth Ambassadors program has been amazing. So I've had 3 years now where I've gotten to see and hear, and many of the alumni are now at university and have come and done internships down in Canberra and are engaged and are thinking about politics, and it's really important that that continue to happen. You have incredible challenges ahead. I mean, we all do, but cost of living, global warming impacts, they are all going to really impact the opportunities. We also have great opportunities though, and so the decisions we make now will make a huge impact to how those opportunities come together for your generation. But you are a smart generation, incredibly engaged and incredibly connected. I mean, so we talk a lot about social media being, this terrible force, but it has in many ways lifted the veil off traditional media. The traditional media doesn't have control of communication anymore. It's a much more, it's a more direct and dynamic thing, which can be a good thing and a bad thing. We have a lot of fake news and a lot of misinformation, but we also have that opportunity to be engaged. And young people have mobilised around Youth for Climate Action and student strikes, and and companies are aware of your generation. So whenever I've dealt with the corporate sector, they talk about how much focus they have on their ESG policies. So that's their environmental, social and governance policies. And that is all around respectful culture, making sure you have got gender equity and good governance process, and then good social and environmental process. And for companies to attract young workers, to attract young customers and everything to work, they're very focused on it. So I strongly support we need, whether it's young people in Parliament, but there should be, for example, I think a youth forum on a regular basis to government, at least yearly, whereby there is that opportunity to voice those concerns and give them agency. I know on social media there's been a call for the major, for Albanese and Morrison to have a youth debate, which so far I think Scott Morrison has resisted. I think that would be good to see.
I think it's interesting as well, if you look at the independent movements that are coming through in the different communities, they all have a younger generation support group. So for Zali, she's got Gen Zali. So if you know any 18 to 24-year-olds who do want to become a little bit more politically engaged, please encourage them to have a look at Gen Zali. And I think it's going to be a marker for these independents that are coming through, that they are listening to that younger generation. So there is hope, I think. So yeah. Yep. And just a reminder, probably 2 more questions after this. Marie, you've got our number, so you can have a hotline to us. But if we don't get to your questions today, we will be hanging around afterwards. So please come and speak to Zali or speak to the staff if we don't get to your questions today. Yeah.
Thank you, Zali, for your face-to-face communication with us, your constituents. It's very useful. My question goes to the traditional media that you just mentioned, in particular the ABC. People may not realise, but one time, not so very long ago, the ABC's international service, Radio Australia, was the most listened to service in China. Millions of young Chinese learned English in the special Radio Australia English language course that was available. It broadcast every day in Mandarin and Cantonese. It was the most popular shortwave service across the Asia Pacific, beating Voice of America and the BBC World Service in this region. In 2014, your thankfully defeated predecessor axed huge amounts of money from the ABC and stopped the shortwave services to Asia. Our soft diplomacy was almost brought to an end. In terms of security in the region and security of balanced information to the Australian people, this present government has done everything it can to denigrate the ABC. It's refused to have a debate in the current election process on the ABC. It handed Murdoch $40 million to do women's sport. It took it away from the ABC. And recently, Fletcher allowed the Murdoch organisations through Sky News to go into 7 million potential viewers in regional Australia without a licence fee on free-to-air in a deal with Macquarie Bank through Southern Cross Austereo. Will you, when re-elected to the Parliament, back a plan, if it's a Labor government, to enhance the capacity of the ABC to restore Radio Australia to broadcasting in the region properly and helping its Pacific neighbours through their requirements for broadcasting, and also to give regional Australian services through the ABC a better funding base?
Thank you. Look, incredibly important. I haven't got the specific details about reinstating that radio service. So I would say in principle, yes, but I haven't got all the details, so I'll just put that proviso. Incredibly important that we have an independent media that operates well, and I definitely recognise that the ABC has been under attack, but also under funding stress with cutbacks. I think it's important that in fact we put the ABC funding out onto a cycle that is outside of election cycle to ensure it has better planning capacity. I think that's a really important step that needs to happen. And I am concerned about the loss of independence in the media, the partiality, and also the concentration of media ownership and influence. It is important. It is incredibly dangerous, as we see with what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. The first step of losing democracy is losing the fourth estate, losing a free and independent journalism and media. It's incredibly important that it hold government to account, no matter what stripes the government is. And we saw actually, it's hard to remember when there's been so much happening over the last 3 years, but it was only the week after the last 2019 election that you saw journalists being raided by the AFP as a result, right? So you can't forget some of these things. It didn't happen. It did happen. We also, there is a reluctance for transparency and accountability at the moment, which I think is concerning, and I do push back on, especially. And so, yes, strongly support proper funding of our national broadcaster and a review. I do actually support an inquiry into our media ownership and the influence, because I do think it's concerning where it's going. Especially when we look at the influence and the importance of of the ABC radio in our regions over the last 3 years, when we've been just after so many disasters, like through the bushfires, it was the ABC radio that kept so many communities informed and safe. Through the floods, again, incredibly important. We just need to put a proper value on those services. We can't afford to lose them. And I agree, from a soft diplomacy point of view, with our Pacific partners, with the broader world community, incredibly important. So I strongly support the role of the fourth estate is incredibly important in democracy for it to work.
Had one from this side of the room, so Maria, I think you've got the call.
You've got it.
You probably don't need the microphone, but
cut me out.
No one cuts Maria. You probably do need the microphone.
Like a good Maria. Now you put me on the spot. What is two things that I would like to ask you about. One is, you mentioned 1,000 Afghan refugees that arrived. Well, that your office assisted with their visas, perhaps, or the way they come here. My question to you is: are they in your electorate, or are they outside?
They haven't all come to live. No, they haven't come to live here. But it was through Craig Foster. So it was the sporting community. When the bull fell, it was very much different communities were contacted for assistance. And I guess from my past as a female sports person, sporting in Afghanistan over the last 20 years, a way of building on women's rights has been through participation in sport, because it really challenged the original kind of cultural expectations. And then with the takeover by the Taliban meant that all the families and people who had actively participated in sport and promoted women's rights were then being targeted and persecuted. And it was at a time where, for example, we had the Tokyo Paralympian athletes being targeted, and then the national soccer team and cricket team, and a few other sports. And so we were able to, it's very hard to explain the chaos of the situation, where you have people moving house every 3 hours to avoid detection, having to send through their details on WhatsApp and photos and then translate documents and who has passports and who doesn't, and putting all this into a format for the department to be able to review, ensure the safety checks, and then approve, and then get people through to the airport. So it took a huge amount of work. Some of these families, the department has processes of how they assist refugees. They haven't settled here in Warringah, but there are some in the ACT, there are some Melbourne and in other areas, and through Craig Foster and a lot of other programs that assist refugees, have been able to sort of keep track with where they are and how they're going.
And will you be helping with the Ukrainian people that are in a similar situation? Well, not quite similar, but also in danger, yeah.
Yeah, it's been quite, we've assisted a number of fundraisers to assist Ukrainians. I actually met, was it yesterday? I've lost track of my days, Friday, with some young women who were here for 6 months from Ukraine to try and finish their studies, while obviously with the hope of going home. Slightly different situation with Ukrainian. They need assistance now, but they definitely want to go home to rebuild their country. That the patriotism and the sense of wanting to go home. It's incredibly distressing for anyone having to leave their country in the current circumstances. So I will be putting to the government. We have had reports of some people seeking refuge for a short period of time being refused on the basis that they don't have family members here.
That's right.
On the idea that somehow they become a overstay risk. But all the feedback I have is that even more so, people needing refuge now don't want to stay. They want to go back as soon as it's safe to do so. So I will be putting some pressure and putting to the government that they need to ensure we're assisting everyone that does need help, that's seeking refuge for the time being.
I'll be visiting you soon.
Okay, please do.
No, but
we have that.
Yeah, thank you. The other question that I have is completely not related to refugees, is about the change in the home package service for elderly people, and how is it going to be that people will have to have a 2-hour service instead of the hour service that they have now. Now that's going to create all sorts of problems for the people who get the service and for the people who provide the service. Do you have any?
I haven't had feedback about that just yet, so I might have to take that one on notice to find out a bit more from the department. And I'd be curious, I would be very interested to know from service providers what they see will be the impact of those changes. With the aged care packages, it's incredibly frustrating is the delay in approval and the backlog. And then, because unfortunately people tend to need to progress through the different aged care level of plans prior to them even being approved, which is really difficult. So could I take that on notice to get back to you on in terms of how that will impact and the numbers in our community of who's impacted? But I do know from an aged care point of view, we really do. It is incredibly hard. It's a big sector. We have workforce shortages when it comes to at-home home care, as well as in residential facilities.
Okay, we might bring things to a conclusion there, but as I said, the staff and Zali will be here for a little while, so if you did have a question that either you tried to ask or perhaps you preferred not to ask publicly, please don't hesitate to come up to one of us. So just to introduce you to the team, we've got Hadley here, who's one of our operations project managers in the office, working with Matt up the back there. If anyone's ever ordered an Australian flag or a picture of the Queen, you would have been dealing with Matt, so among his many, many talents. And Nicola, who manages our electorate office business and particularly community and constituent liaison. So if you've been writing to Zali on any of the issues, Nicola sort of oversees a lot of that responses. Then we have Sean, who's one of our community liaison officers, particularly in regards to NDIS and aged care and some youth services and aspects as well. We have Tina, who is Zali's diary manager. So if you're part of a group that wants to get Zali along to something, hit Tina up now. She's got the diary at the ready. We've got Julie at the front here, who deals with the immigration, visa, citizenship applications. So if you've got a query around that, please come and speak to Julie. And then saving the most popular person, we've got Harry, policy advisor there as well, particularly in regards to environment and climate change. So have a chat to Harry if you've got questions or ideas about Zali's policy areas. And then finally, Rachel, who is always the most popular person in the room. She's our grants officer. So she's got the money. So if you're, again, part of a group that would like to apply for some grant funding, please go and see Rachel. And so then we've also, about media, you can come and have a chat to me about that one. Yep, all good. And as I said before, Deputy Mayor Candy Bingham is here if you have some council-specific questions. Careful what you wish for, Candy, you might be here for a while. But I'd also just like to acknowledge some honorary members of our team, Marcel and Chris, who have been helping us out with our town hall meetings. This is actually the last one that we're holding before the election. So thank you to both of you for helping us spread the word on the town hall meetings. Thank you for that. So just a little bit of housekeeping at the end as well. If you've already signed up for Zali's electronic newsletter, thank you. Love to hear your feedback. If you've got feedback on those newsletters, please feel free to share them with your networks and encourage them to sign up. If you haven't already signed up, you can do so on the website. And also on the website is where you can find those 6 policy areas and the documents that are vital going forward into this next Parliament. And again, feel free to share them with family and friends. And one thing that didn't come up today was truth in political advertising. Some of you may know that Zali presented a bill towards the end of the last parliament called Stop the Lies, pretty blatant in what it is intending to do, around political advertising. There is no rules, no legislation that restricts political parties or candidates from telling blatant lies during an election campaign. We feel that's wrong. We're pretty sure most right-thinking people in Warringah think that's wrong. That bill, not surprisingly, didn't get debated by government or by opposition. If you receive something in your letterbox in the next 3 weeks, or if you drive past a truck that you think is not necessarily telling the right message, hypothetically, if you get a phone call in the middle of the night and you don't think that it's right, we've set up an email hotline for you to be able to report that to us. Unfortunately, the AEC doesn't have anything like this. The government certainly doesn't have anything like this. So again, it's left up to a crossbencher, an independent, to at least have somewhere where you can detail your experience or what you suspect might be misinformation or blatant lies. So the email address is reportmisinfo@zalistegel.com.au. It's all on our website if you'd like some information. Unfortunately, isn't a lot that we can actually do with it, but what we want to do, is compile the information and provide it to the ABC, who are running a research project about misleading information. I can't remember the exact name of their research project, but anything we assess, we pass on to them. But also, Zali fully intends to resubmit that bill if and when elected to the 47th Parliament, and to have examples of misinformation during an election campaign. I'm a big believer in the jinx, so I'll say, but thank you for your confidence. Just finally, that Gen Zali group, if you do know some younger voters or younger people in your family or networks that would like to get involved, please send them that way. But going forward, our office is an open door office. We often joke it's an open lift office, because anyone that went to the office when the previous member was there, you may recall that the lift was always locked downstairs to stop people getting up to level 2 where we're located. That lift has been unlocked for 3 years, and we're proud of that fact. So please don't ever hesitate to come and pop in, or to write to us or to phone us. But for now, if you'd like to come and have a chat, we're all here and available. Thank you again for spending your Sunday afternoon to hear a bit from Zali and to ask her some questions. Really appreciate the support, and as we said, it's what makes a good local member or a good local candidate, is hearing from the community and being open and accessible. So we like to continue that tradition. But thanks all again. Have a good afternoon.